I've learned that some people only see your value when you stop giving it away for free. Today, I discovered I'd been giving mine away for 29 years. The words that changed everything came from my son's new wife at their wedding reception. The wedding I'd paid for, every single dollar of the $215,000 it cost to fill that ballroom with crystal chandeliers and imported roses. This is the difficult mother-in-law I warned you about. Nicole's voice carried across the gleaming marble floor as she gestured toward me with her champagne flute, surrounded by her family like a queen holding court. The Thompson family, her father Richard, mother Diane, brother Ethan, and sister Sarah, all turned to look at me standing there in my emerald green dress. The dress I'd spent 2 weeks finding, wanting to look elegant but not overshadow the bride. Their laughter started small, polite chuckles that built into something crueler. And then I watched Nicole's father's face drain of all color, his champagne glass frozen halfway to his lips. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how I ended up being humiliated at my own son's wedding, and why Richard Thompson looked like he'd seen a ghost. The phone call came on a Tuesday night in late March. I was in my home office reviewing quarterly reports, the desk lamp casting warm light over papers that most people wouldn't recognize as anything more than boring numbers. To me, they told stories. Stories of buildings bought and sold, of investments that grew or faltered, of the small empire my late husband Robert and I had built together before cancer took him 8 years ago. "Mom?" Jordan's voice had that particular tone I'd learned to recognize over 29 years of motherhood, the one that meant he needed something. "Hi, sweetheart." I set down my pen and gave him my full attention. "What's going on?" "I've got incredible news." He paused, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Nicole said yes. My heart did that thing mothers' hearts do, that leap of joy mixed with the bittersweet knowledge that your child is moving into a chapter of life where you're no longer the main character. "Oh, Jordan, that's wonderful. Congratulations." "I proposed last night. Took her to that Italian place downtown, the one you took me to when I graduated business school." Aurelio's. The bill had been close to $400 that night, but watching Jordan's face light up as he talked about his MBA had made every penny worth it. That's what I told myself then. That's what I'd been telling myself for years. "Tell me everything," I said, settling back in my leather chair, Robert's chair, the one I'd sat in so many times trying to feel closer to him. For the next 20 minutes, Jordan described the proposal, how he'd hidden the ring in her tiramisu, how she'd cried, how perfect it all was. He talked about Nicole's career in marketing, her close-knit family, the apartment they'd been sharing for the past year in Lincoln Park. What he didn't mention was how they planned to pay for a wedding. That conversation came 3 weeks later. I'd invited Jordan over for Sunday dinner, something we did once a month when his schedule allowed. I made his favorite, pot roast with roasted vegetables, the same meal I'd made every Sunday when he was growing up, and Robert was still alive. "This is amazing, Mom." Jordan loaded his plate for the second time. "Nicole keeps trying to get me to eat healthier. More salads, less red meat." "A little pot roast never hurt anyone," I said, watching him eat with the satisfaction that only comes from feeding someone you love. "How are the wedding plans coming along?" He set down his fork, and there it was again, that slight tension in his shoulders that meant we were approaching the real reason for his visit. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about." His fingers drummed against the table, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "The thing is, Nicole's family has certain expectations." I poured us both more wine, saying nothing. After raising a child alone for 21 years, I'd learned that silence often revealed more than questions. "Her older sister got married 2 years ago," Jordan continued. "Big wedding at the Four Seasons, 300 guests. Nicole showed me pictures. It was really elegant. I'm sure it was beautiful. And her cousin, Sarah's daughter, she got married at the Drake Hotel last summer." He was talking faster now, words tumbling out. "Nicole's been dreaming about her wedding since she was little, and I want to give her everything she deserves." What about what you deserve? I thought. What about what I deserve? But I looked at my son's face, so hopeful, so young despite being 29 years old, and felt that familiar pull of maternal love overriding common sense. "Have you talked to Nicole about a smaller wedding?" I asked gently. "Something more intimate?" "Mom, you don't understand." He leaned forward, earnest. "Her family, they're really wealthy. Her dad owns Thompson Realty Group. They're huge in Chicago real estate. I want to be worthy of her." Those words hit me like a physical blow. Worthy of her. As if my son, this bright, kind man I'd raised, wasn't inherently worthy of anyone's love. "Jordan," I said carefully, "if she loves you, she'd marry you in a courthouse." I know. He waved his hand dismissively. "But it's not just about us. It's about families coming together. First impressions matter." "How much are we talking about?" He took a breath. "The venues she's looking at start around $150,000, and that's just the space. We'd need to budget for catering, flowers, band, photographer, all the other things. Maybe $200,000 total." The number sat between us like an uninvited guest. "That's more money than most people make in 4 years," I said. "But you can afford it, right?" The words came out quickly, almost defensively. "The business is doing well, and you always said you wanted to help with my wedding someday." I had said that. Years ago, when Jordan was still in college and the idea of his wedding was a distant theoretical event. I'd imagined helping, yes, but I'd imagined a partnership, a conversation, not a transaction. "Let me think about it," I said. That night I sat alone in Robert's study, our study really, though I still thought of it as his 8 years after his death. His photograph sat on the desk, that smile I'd fallen in love with 32 years ago, frozen in time. "What would you do?" I asked his picture, but I already knew. Robert had always been generous with Jordan, sometimes too generous. It was one of the few things we'd argued about. "He needs to learn the value of earning things," I'd said. "He'll learn," Robert had promised. "But first, he needs to know he's loved." The next morning I called Jordan and told him yes. Looking back now, from that bathroom at the wedding reception with my makeup still perfect despite the emotional earthquake I'd just experienced, I realized that single word, yes, had been the beginning of everything. The 2 months between my agreement and the engagement dinner passed in a flurry of deposits and planning. Jordan would text me updates. "Booked the venue. Nicole's so excited." Or, "Found an amazing photographer. Just need to put down $5,000 to hold the date." Each text ended with a "thank you," "thanks, Mom," or "you're the best." But they felt increasingly perfunctory. Transactions disguised as gratitude. The engagement dinner was held at Gibson's Steakhouse, the Thompson family's choice. I arrived 15 minutes early, as was my habit, and was shown to a private dining room where soft jazz played and the lighting was designed to make everyone look wealthy and important. Nicole was already there with her family, a tableau of old money and casual confidence. Richard Thompson stood as I entered, a tall man in his early 60s, silver-haired and distinguished in the way that expensive suits and good genes can create. "You must be Jordan's mother." He extended his hand. "Richard Thompson, pleasure to meet you." "Angela Ridgway." His handshake was firm but not aggressive. "Thank you for having me." Nicole was beautiful in that effortless way some young women achieve. Her blonde hair swept up, her dress probably costing more than most people's monthly rent. She smiled at me, polite but measured. "Mrs. Ridgway, it's so nice to finally meet you. Jordan talks about you all the time. Please call me Angela." I smiled back, trying to bridge the formality. "And congratulations, Jordan is over the moon." "We both are." She glanced at Jordan, who'd just arrived, slightly out of breath. "Your son is pretty special." The dinner passed in pleasant conversation, Richard and Diane asking polite questions about my background, my work, my life. Every time I started to answer with any detail, Jordan would redirect the conversation. "Mom keeps busy," he'd say when Richard asked what I did for a living. Or, "She's always been private about her career," when Diane pressed for more information. I remember feeling a strange mix of emotions. Part of me was relieved not to be the center of attention. But another part, a part I didn't want to examine too closely, wondered why my son seemed so uncomfortable with me being fully seen. The answer to that question would come later, in the worst possible way. Which brings us back to September 24th, standing in that gleaming reception hall, watching my son's new wife introduce me to her family as the difficult mother-in-law. The words hung in the air like smoke, and I watched Richard Thompson's face transform from polite attention to something approaching horror. "Wait," he said, his voice cutting through the laughter. "Did you say Angela Ridgway?" Nicole looked confused. "Yes, Jordan's mother, the one I told you about." "Angela Ridgway." Richard's champagne glass was trembling now. From Ridgway Properties? I prefer to keep my married name, I said calmly, though my heart was pounding. After my husband Robert passed, it felt important to honor his memory. Mom? Jordan appeared at my elbow, finally sensing something was wrong. What's going on? Richard's wife Diane stepped forward, her finishing school smile firmly in place. Surely this is just a coincidence. Same last name as the Ridgway who founded Thompson Realty Group? I completed her sentence. Not a coincidence, I'm afraid. My husband's family provided the initial investment in 1965. When Robert died, his shares passed to me. I watched the mathematics dawn on Richard's face. The original investment. The additional shares I'd been quietly purchasing through various legal entities for the past 8 years. The controlling interest I'd secured. He couldn't seem to finish the sentence. Your new CEO, I said pleasantly. As of last Monday, the board vote was quite conclusive. The silence that followed was absolute. 300 guests in the ballroom beyond, but in our little circle, you could have heard a pin drop. Wait, Nicole's voice was sharp now, confused. Daddy, what is she talking about? Your mother-in-law, Richard said weakly, controls 52% of our company. Ethan, the brother who'd been so quick to laugh at his sister's introduction, went pale. Sarah's husband whispered something urgent in her ear. And Nicole looked between me and her father like she was watching her world reorganize itself in real time. But Jordan said, she turned to my son. You told me your mother was in middle management, that she worked for some accounting firm. I thought, Jordan's face had gone red. Mom, you never asked, I replied simply. I turned to Richard with my warmest smile, the one I'd perfected in 100 boardroom meetings. I'll see you Monday morning, Richard. 8 a.m. sharp. My assistant will send you the agenda. Then I looked at Nicole, this young woman who'd called me difficult without knowing the first thing about me. Congratulations on your marriage, dear. Family dinners should be interesting from now on. I walked away with my head high, my heels clicking against marble, leaving chaos in my wake. Behind me, I heard Nicole's frantic whisper to her mother. Why didn't anyone tell me she was important? And Diane's desperate reply. We didn't know. Richard said Jordan's mother was nobody. Nobody. The word followed me through the reception hall, past tables of guests laughing and dancing, past the $15,000 worth of floral arrangements I'd paid for, past the band I'd hired, and the photographer capturing every moment. Nobody. I made it to the ladies' room and locked myself in the largest stall. My hands were shaking now, but not from fear or humiliation. From anger. From a rage so pure and clean it felt almost clarifying. For 29 years, I'd put my son first. I'd worked 2 jobs after Robert died to keep Jordan in private school. I'd built a business empire while making sure he never felt the weight of our financial struggles. I'd said yes to every request, funded every dream, smoothed every path. And somewhere along the way, I'd become nobody to the people who mattered most. My phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca Hayes, my CFO and closest friend. Emergency board meeting requested by Richard Thompson for Monday. He doesn't know I've been working with you. What should I tell him? I looked at myself in the mirror. Emerald dress still perfect, makeup unsmudged, hair still in place. On the outside, I looked exactly the same as when I'd arrived at this wedding, but something fundamental had shifted inside. I typed back, tell him the meeting is approved, and Rebecca, prepare the restructuring files. It's time Thompson Realty joined the 21st century. Then I added, and Rebecca, thank you for being someone who sees me. Her response came immediately. Always. Now go show them who Angela Ridgway really is. I stood there for another moment, studying my reflection. 60 years old, a widow, a mother who'd just been publicly humiliated by her own family, but also a CEO, a businesswoman who'd built an empire, a woman who'd spent 8 years quietly acquiring enough power to change everything. Well, Robert, I whispered to my absent husband, I think it's time I stopped being nobody. What do you think? In the silence of that bathroom, I could almost hear his answer. Show them who you really are, Angela, not who they need you to be. I unlocked the stall, checked my lipstick one final time, and walked back out into my son's wedding reception. Monday was going to be very interesting indeed. I didn't sleep well that night after the wedding. Not from anxiety. I'd learned long ago that anxiety was just fear without a plan, and I always had a plan. No, I lay awake because my mind kept replaying every interaction I'd had with Jordan over the past 6 months, looking for the moment when I'd become nobody to him. The alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., but I was already awake, watching dawn break over Chicago's skyline from my bedroom window. Robert used to say that sunrise was God's way of giving you permission to start over. I could use a fresh start. By 7:15, I was dressed in my Navy power suit, the one I'd bought 3 years ago when I knew the Thompson Realty acquisition was inevitable. Conservative enough to show respect, expensive enough to command it. I'd learned that lesson early. Women in business have about 30 seconds to establish whether they're players or props. Rebecca was waiting in the parking garage when I arrived at 7:40, holding 2 coffee cups and wearing an expression I'd seen before, the one that meant she had information I needed but wasn't going to like. "That bad?" I asked, taking the coffee. "Richard called me 6 times yesterday. He wanted to know if the CEO transition was legally sound." She made air quotes around the last 2 words. I told him I'd reviewed every document personally, and the board vote was unanimous. Unanimous except for him and his cousin, which makes it sufficiently unanimous. Rebecca smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Angela, he also asked if there was any way to," and I quote, "reverse this unfortunate situation." We walked toward the elevator, our heels echoing in the empty garage. "What did you tell him?" "That corporate law doesn't recognize unfortunate as grounds for reversal." She pressed the button for the 15th floor. "He's scared. His whole family is scared. Ethan called me twice asking if his VP position was secure." "And is it?" "That depends entirely on whether he can justify his salary." Rebecca pulled out her tablet, scrolling through files. "I've been reviewing his department's performance. Last quarter, marketing expenses were up 42%, while measurable results were up 3%. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, my floor now. The receptionist, a young woman named Jennifer, looked up with wide eyes. "Good morning, Ms. Ridgway, Mr. Thompson is already in the boardroom. He's been here since 7. "Thank you, Jennifer." I paused. "How long have you worked here?" "Almost 3 years, ma'am." "And in those 3 years, has anyone from the Thompson family ever asked your name?" She blinked, surprised by the question. No, ma'am. They usually just call me the girl at the desk." "Well, Jennifer, that's going to change. I'll need you to schedule a company-wide meeting for Thursday at 2 p.m. All employees, no exceptions." Rebecca and I continued to my office, formerly Richard's office, though he'd been moved to the smaller corner suite over the weekend. My assistant had done an excellent job removing his personal items while keeping the professional ones. The mahogany desk remained, as did the view of downtown Chicago, but the family photos were gone, replaced by the abstract art I preferred. "Ready?" Rebecca asked. I set down my coffee and straightened my jacket. Let's go see what Richard Thompson thinks he can negotiate. The boardroom was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a table that could seat 20, and leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's cars. Richard sat at one end, surrounded by papers, looking like he'd aged 5 years since Saturday. "Angela." He stood quickly. "Thank you for agreeing to meet early." "Richard." I took the seat at the head of the table, the CEO's seat. Though I should clarify, this isn't a negotiation. It's a briefing. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I've prepared some documentation about the company's history, our management philosophy, the relationships we've built." "I've been studying this company for 8 years, I interrupted gently. "I probably know its history better than you do." 8 years? His voice cracked slightly. "You've been planning this for 8 years? Planning is the wrong word. Preparing would be more accurate. I opened my briefcase and removed 3 folders, sliding them across the polished table. These are the changes that will be implemented over the next quarter. Richard's hand shook slightly as he opened the first folder. I watched his face cycle through several emotions as he read. Disbelief, anger, resignation. You're restructuring the entire company. I'm optimizing it. There's a difference. $1.2 million in new employee benefits? He looked up, and I was surprised to see not just anger, but genuine confusion. Angela, we can't afford. You've been paying yourself, your son, and your nephew a combined $800,000 in salaries annually. Rebecca stepped forward, placing her tablet on the table. For work that, frankly, could be done by 3 people making half that. Now wait let me finish. My voice was calm but firm. Your company, and yes, Richard, it's my company now, has been stagnant for 5 years. You know why? He stared at me, silent. Because you confused comfort with success. You maintained relationships instead of pursuing excellence. You paid family members for showing up instead of performing. I stood and walked to the window, looking down at the Monday morning traffic. My husband Robert believed in your father. He invested everything we had because he saw potential. My father built something special. Your father built something functional. I'm going to make it exceptional. I turned back to him. But I'm not here to destroy your family's legacy, Richard. I'm here to save it from your family's complacency. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes. Finally, Richard spoke, his voice quiet. What do you want from us? I want you to earn your positions, all of you. I returned to my seat. You'll remain as president. President, not CEO, and you'll manage day-to-day operations, but you'll report to me and you'll meet quarterly performance benchmarks. And if I don't? Then you'll discover that sentiment doesn't override competence in my boardroom. Rebecca placed another document in front of him. These are the new performance standards for all executive positions, including yours. Richard scanned the pages, and I saw the moment he realized he couldn't fight this. His shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly. What about Ethan? Your son keeps his position if he can justify it. Rebecca will be auditing his department this month. I softened my voice slightly. Richard, I'm not a monster. I'm a businesswoman who's tired of watching potential waste away because people are more comfortable than they are ambitious. This is about the wedding, isn't it? The words burst out of him. Nicole's comment. She didn't mean, this has nothing to do with the wedding. I met his eyes directly. This has everything to do with 8 years of strategic planning and a company that's underperforming its market value by 30%. The wedding just happened to be when you learned about it. He deflated completely. I need to tell my family. You have until the company-wide meeting on Thursday. I gathered my folders. And Richard, the employee benefits package goes into effect immediately. Your staff has been underpaid and undervalued for too long. That ends now. As he left, shoulders hunched in defeat, Rebecca turned to me. You okay? I should be celebrating. I sat down heavily in my chair. Why don't I feel better about this? Because you're not cruel, Angela. You're just done being taken advantage of. She paused. Jordan called my office this morning, 3 times. What did he want? To talk to you. He says you're not answering his calls. I pulled out my phone. 7 missed calls from Jordan. 12 text messages. I hadn't even heard it ring. Mom, please call me. We need to talk about what happened. Nicole is really upset. Her family is freaking out. Why didn't you tell me about the company? Mom, please. This is important. I set the phone down. Schedule a call with David Patterson. I need to discuss my will. Rebecca's eyes widened. Angela, and tell Jordan I'll see him Sunday evening. My house. Just him. Not Nicole. The next 6 days passed in a blur of meetings, restructuring plans, and carefully avoided phone calls from my son. I threw myself into work the way I always did when emotions threatened to overwhelm logic. By Thursday's company-wide meeting, I'd identified $3.2 million in operational inefficiencies, improved 3 key vendor contracts, and earned the cautious respect of Thompson Realty's senior staff. What I hadn't done was figure out how to talk to my son. Sunday arrived gray and drizzly, Chicago weather matching my mood. I spent the morning cooking, pot roast again, because apparently I was a creature of habit, even in crisis. By 6 p.m., the house smelled like Sunday dinners from Jordan's childhood, and I'd set the table for 2. The doorbell rang at exactly 7. Jordan had always been punctual, a trait he'd inherited from his father. Hi, Mom. He stood on my doorstep, hands in his pockets, looking younger than his 29 years. Thanks for agreeing to see me. Come in, sweetheart. I stepped aside, and he entered like he was walking into foreign territory instead of the house he'd grown up in. We settled at the dining room table, and for a few minutes we maintained the fiction that this was just another family dinner. I served the roast. He complimented the vegetables. We talked about the weather. Finally, I set down my fork. When did you start seeing me as an obligation instead of your mother? Jordan's face went pale. Mom, that's not... Let me finish, please. I took a breath, surprised to find my hands shaking slightly. I need to understand when I stopped being Angela to you and became just a resource to be managed. You're not. He stopped, seeming to realize that denial wasn't going to work. I don't know how to answer that. Try the truth. He stared at his plate for a long moment. When he looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed. Do you know what it's like to be with someone whose family has everything? Whose father owns a huge company, whose brother is a vice president, whose childhood home has 6 bedrooms and a guest house. So this is about insecurity. It's about feeling like I'm not enough. The words exploded out of him. Every time we'd visit Nicole's family, I'd see the way they looked at me, like I was less than, like I didn't measure up. And lying about me made you feel better? His face crumpled. I never meant to lie. I downplayed things. When Nicole asked about you, I'd change the subject. When her family asked what you did, I'd be vague. You told her I was difficult, that I tried to control your life with money. My voice was steady, but something inside me was breaking. Did you believe that, Jordan? Or was it just easier to make me the problem? He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so familiar it hurt. I don't know. Maybe both? Nicole's family is so close, so involved in each other's lives. When she'd talk about her mom, about how they'd shop together and plan things together, I felt like I needed to explain why we weren't like that. We could have been like that. The words came out softer than I intended. If you'd ever invited me in. You were always so busy with work. Jordan, I stood up, unable to sit still anymore. Do you know what I did the week you graduated from business school? He shook his head. I turned down a contract negotiation in New York worth $4 million because I didn't want to miss your graduation dinner. I walked to the window, looking out at the darkening street. Do you know what I did the week you got your first apartment? Mom, I personally interviewed and hired the maintenance team for that building because I wanted to make sure you'd be safe. I turned back to him. Do you know how many business meetings I've rescheduled? How many opportunities I've turned down? How many times I've put your needs before my own? I never asked you to do that. No, you just accepted it as your due. The truth of that statement hung between us. And somewhere along the way, I taught you that love means sacrifice without reciprocation. That's on me, Jordan. I take responsibility for that. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. What do you want me to say? That I'm a terrible son? That I took advantage of you? Fine, I'm sorry. I don't want an apology born from guilt. I walked back to the table but didn't sit. I want to understand how we got here, how my son could stand by while his wife called me difficult in front of 300 people, how you could accept $215,000 from me without once asking if I could afford it, how you could introduce me to Nicole's family without once mentioning what I actually do for a living. I was ashamed. The words burst out of him, raw and honest. There. Are you happy? I was ashamed that at 29 years old, I still needed my mother's money. I was ashamed that Nicole's family had so much and I had so little. I was ashamed that I couldn't give her the wedding she wanted without your help. We stared at each other across the dinner table, the pot roast growing cold between us. So instead of dealing with that shame, I said quietly, you decided to make me the problem. I didn't mean for it to go this far. His voice broke. The things Nicole said at the wedding, I never thought she'd actually. She said what you'd been saying to her for months, Jordan. She just said it out loud. He slumped back into his chair, defeated. What do you want me to do? I want you to be honest with yourself about why you resented my help. I sat down across from him. Because here's what I've realized this week. I enabled this. I made it too easy for you to take without feeling the weight of what you were taking. And in doing so, I taught you that love is transactional. That's not. It is. And it stops now. I pulled an envelope from my pocket and slid it across the table. Effective immediately, I'm stopping all financial support. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside was a letter from my attorney, formally terminating the various ways I'd been supporting him financially. The apartment lease I'd co-signed, the car insurance I'd been paying, the credit card I'd given him for emergencies. Mom, you can't be serious. I have bills, rent. Figure it out. Like I did at 32 when your father died and left me with a mortgage, medical debt, and a 12-year-old son to raise. I kept my voice level. I'm not doing this to punish you, Jordan. I'm doing it because I need to know I raised a man who can stand on his own 2 feet. This is crazy. One comment at a wedding and you're cutting me off completely? This isn't about one comment. It's about 29 years of me loving you more than you respected me. I stood up again, needing movement. And it's about me finally understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone experience the consequences of their choices. He stood too, his face red with anger or shame, or both. What about Nicole? What am I supposed to tell her? Tell her the truth for once. She'll leave me. Maybe. Or maybe she'll finally see who you actually are instead of who you've been pretending to be. I walked toward the kitchen, needing to put distance between us before I said something I'd regret. Dinner's over, Jordan. You should go. Mom, please, go. He left, and I stood in my kitchen listening to his car pull out of the driveway. I waited for tears to come, but they didn't. Instead, I felt empty, hollowed out, like I'd just performed surgery on myself without anesthesia. My phone rang. Jordan's number. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again, and again. On the 4th call, I answered. Jordan. Mom, wait. Don't hang up. His voice was thick with tears. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago. Jordan, I can't do this tonight. I'm in debt. The words stopped me cold. What? Serious debt. Like really serious. He was crying openly now, words tumbling out between sobs. Credit cards, personal loans, the car payment I told you I was making. I haven't paid any of it in months. I sat down at the kitchen table, my legs suddenly unreliable. How much? $47,000 in credit card debt. The car is 3 months behind, so that's another $18,000. And, he paused. And I borrowed money from Nicole's parents. The room tilted slightly. How much, Jordan? $35,000. Last year. They think it was for a business investment, some consulting firm I was supposedly starting. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. It's all gone, Mom. Living expenses, trying to keep up appearances, the engagement ring I told you I saved for. I financed that too. I closed my eyes, trying to process what I was hearing. So the $215,000 for the wedding was basically a bailout. I needed it to stay afloat, to keep Nicole from finding out how bad things were. Does she know? My voice sounded strange to my own ears, distant and calm despite the chaos erupting inside me. Silence. Jordan, does your wife know you're in debt? He took a shaky breath. She knows some of it. Some? She knows about the credit cards. She helped me hide them from her family. The implication hit me like cold water. She helped you hide debt from her own parents? Mom, you need to understand. Nicole's family, they're not as wealthy as they seem. Her dad's company has been struggling for years. They live on credit and property equity and the image of success. His words were coming faster now, desperate. When she met me, when she found out about you, we both thought, you thought I could save both families. The pieces were clicking into place with sickening clarity. That's why she pushed for such an expensive wedding. Why you were so vague about my career. You needed me invested in this relationship so you could eventually ask for more. It wasn't like that. Not at first. I love her, Mom. I really do. But things got complicated, and we were drowning. And you've always been so generous. I need to think. I stood up, gripping the edge of the table. Don't call me again tonight. Mom, please. I hung up. For a long time, I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the remains of the dinner neither of us had finished, trying to understand how I'd missed this, how my bright, charming son had become someone who'd lie to everyone in his life, including himself. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mrs. Ridgway, this is Nicole. We need to talk. Tomorrow? Please. There are things you don't know. I stared at the message, then at the pot roast congealing on the table, then at the photographs of Jordan covering my refrigerator, birthday parties and graduations and Christmas mornings, a chronicle of a childhood I'd thought was happy. Another text came through, this time from Rebecca. Saw Jordan's car leaving your place. You okay? Was I okay? I just discovered my son was a liar, his wife was a manipulator, and the $215,000 I'd spent on their wedding was essentially funding an elaborate con. I texted Rebecca back. Can you come over? And bring David Patterson's number. I think I need my lawyer after all. Then I texted Nicole. My house, tomorrow. 6 p.m. Come alone. I looked at Robert's photograph on the mantel, the one I'd taken our last anniversary before he got sick. You were right, I whispered to his frozen smile. I should have taught him to earn instead of expect. But it's not too late, is it? Tell me it's not too late. The house remained silent. But in that silence, I felt something shift. The same thing that had shifted in the bathroom at the wedding reception. A fundamental change in who I was willing to be and what I was willing to accept. Tomorrow, Nicole would tell me whatever truth she'd been hiding. And then we'd see if this family could be saved, or if some things were broken beyond repair. Outside, rain began to fall against the windows, and I sat alone in my kitchen, surrounded by photographs of a life I'd thought I knew. Nicole arrived at exactly 6 p.m., and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked small. No designer outfit, no carefully styled hair, just jeans, a sweater, and eyes red from crying. Thank you for seeing me, she said at the door. I led her to the living room, not the dining room. This wasn't a meal, it was a reckoning. Would you like tea? I asked, defaulting to the hospitality ingrained in me despite everything. No, thank you. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands twisted in her lap. Mrs. Ridgway, I need to tell you the truth. All of it. I settled into Robert's chair across from her and waited. My father's company isn't doing well. It hasn't been for about 3 years. The words tumbled out quickly like she'd been holding them in too long. We've been living on borrowed money, home equity lines, corporate credit, refinancing properties over and over, the house, the cars, the lifestyle. It's all smoke and mirrors. And when you met Jordan? She had the grace to look ashamed. When Jordan told me his mother was Angela Ridgway, I looked you up. I found articles about your business success, saw that you'd been acquiring shares in various companies. I thought... She swallowed hard. I thought if we got married, if we became family, maybe you could help save my father's company. The honesty was almost refreshing in its ugliness. So the expensive wedding, the Thompson family expectations, that was all theater? Not all of it. Her voice cracked. I do love Jordan. That part is real. But when he started complaining about you being controlling, about how you always wanted to be involved in his life, I saw an opportunity to paint me as the problem so you could manage me. Yes, she wiped her eyes. I encouraged him to keep you at a distance during the planning. I thought if you felt excluded, you'd try harder to be included, that you'd want to prove yourself to my family. And the comment at the wedding? Nicole's face crumpled completely. I panicked. When I saw you standing there, so elegant and confident, I realized I'd miscalculated everything. You weren't some desperate mother trying to buy her way into her son's life. You were... you. She looked at me with something approaching awe. And then my father recognized you, and I knew everything was about to fall apart. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights briefly illuminating the room. What about the debt? I asked. Jordan's debt. I knew about the credit cards. I helped him hide them because I was hiding things too. She took a shaky breath. My father gave Jordan that $35,000 thinking it was an investment, but really I asked Dad to help us, and Jordan was too ashamed to admit he needed it. So you're both liars? Yes, the word came out as barely a whisper. But Mrs. Ridgway, my father is a good man. He built something real. He got comfortable. He stopped paying attention to the details, trusted the wrong people, made decisions based on relationships instead of business sense. She looked at me desperately. You could save his company. You have the expertise, the capital, everything he needs. Why would I do that? Because Jordan loves me. Because we're family now. She paused. Because you're not the kind of person who destroys things out of spite. She was right about that last part, at least. But she'd also just admitted to manipulating my son and scheming to exploit my resources. Go home, Nicole. I stood up. I need to think. Mrs. Ridgway, go home to your husband and tell him the truth. All of it. No more secrets, no more manipulations. I walked to the door. Because whatever happens next, it needs to be built on honesty, or it's not worth building at all. After she left, I sat alone in Robert's chair and did something I hadn't done since his funeral. I cried. Not delicate tears, but the kind of crying that comes from deep in your chest, the kind that leaves you gasping and empty. I cried for the son I thought I'd raised. I cried for the 29 years I'd spent putting someone else's needs first. I cried for the woman I'd been at the wedding reception, proud, generous, and so completely blind to how she was being used. When the tears finally stopped, I called Rebecca. I need you to dig deeper into Thompson Realty's finances, I said. Everything, every loan, every creditor, every asset and liability. Angela, what are you planning? I don't know yet, but I need all the information before I decide. David Patterson arrived at my office at 9 a.m., carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He'd been my attorney for 15 years, shepherding me through Robert's death, the business acquisitions, and numerous corporate negotiations. You sounded serious on the phone, he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. I need to understand my legal options regarding Jordan's debt. I slid the paperwork across to him, credit card statements, loan documents, everything Jordan had confessed to. David reviewed them silently, his expression growing more concerned with each page. This is bad. If he defaults, his credit is destroyed for years. The car will be repossessed. He could face lawsuits from the credit card companies. What if I pay it off? Then you're enabling his behavior and potentially opening yourself to future exploitation. He looked at me over his reading glasses. Angela, as your attorney and your friend, I have to ask, what's the loving choice here versus the right choice? The question haunted me all morning. After David left, I sat at my desk, staring at the Chicago skyline and thinking about love and boundaries and the difference between helping and enabling. Rebecca knocked and entered without waiting, her tablet in hand and an expression I'd learned to recognize as, "You need to see this." "Tell me," I said. "I found something in Thompson Realty's corporate archives." She set the tablet in front of me. Old loan documents from 1972. Apparently, when Richard's father was expanding the company, he borrowed $500,000 from Robert's family trust. I knew about that loan. It was paid back in the 80s. That's what I thought too. But look at this. She pulled up another document, this one from 1985. The original loan was restructured twice. The final agreement included a clause stating that if Thompson Realty ever faced significant financial hardship, the debt could be recalled or renegotiated. My heart started beating faster. Are you saying the loan was never actually paid off? It was converted into what's essentially a long-term promissory note with a balloon payment due upon certain triggering events. She scrolled to another section. And according to this clause, one of those triggering events is change in majority ownership or control, which happened when I became CEO. Exactly. And with accumulated interest over 40 years, she showed me the calculation. Thompson Realty technically owes your trust fund $2.3 million. I stared at the numbers, my mind racing through implications. Does Richard know about this? I doubt it. This debt is buried in the corporate structure, listed as a long-term liability that nobody's looked at in decades. Rebecca sat down. Angela, you could legally demand payment right now, and given Thompson Realty's current financial state, they couldn't pay it. You could force them into bankruptcy. The power of that knowledge sat heavy on my shoulders. I could destroy Richard Thompson's family business with a single legal demand. I could make them feel the same helplessness and humiliation I'd felt at that wedding reception. But would that make me feel better? Or would it just make me someone I didn't want to be? Schedule a meeting, I said quietly. Everyone involved. Jordan, Nicole, Richard, Diane. This Sunday, my house, 2 p.m. What are you going to do? I'm going to stop letting other people define what love looks like. Sunday afternoon arrived cold and bright, one of those late September days when you can feel autumn taking hold. I'd spent Saturday cleaning my house, not because it was dirty, but because I needed to do something with my hands while my mind worked through what I was going to say. By 2 p.m., they were all there, arranged in my living room like defendants awaiting sentencing. Jordan and Nicole sat together on the couch, holding hands like they were facing a firing squad. Richard and Diane took the wingback chairs, looking smaller than I'd ever seen them. Rebecca stood near the doorway as witness and support. Thank you all for coming, I began, standing near the fireplace where Robert's photograph watched over us. I've spent the last week learning things about each of you, about this family, about myself, and I've made some decisions. Jordan opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. Let me finish, please. You'll all have a chance to speak. I turned to Jordan first, my son, my heart, my biggest disappointment, and deepest love. Jordan, you owe approximately $47,000 in credit card debt, plus $18,000 on your car loan. That's $65,000 total. I pulled out an envelope. I'm going to pay it off. All of it. His face flooded with relief, but I wasn't done. However, you will repay me every penny. $500 a month for 10 years. No interest, but no forgiveness either. Miss 2 consecutive payments, and I report the debt, and we're done financially. Forever. Mom, I'm also requiring that you attend financial counseling. Weekly sessions for the first 6 months, then monthly after that. And Jordan, I softened my voice. You need to see a therapist, not because there's something wrong with you, but because there's something wrong with how you see yourself. And until you fix that, you'll keep making the same mistakes. I turned to Nicole, this young woman who'd called me a pig and then admitted to manipulating my son. Nicole, your parents loaned Jordan $35,000. I'm paying them back in full. Diane gasped, but I continued. You'll work it off. Rebecca is going to hire you at Thompson Realty. Entry-level position in property management. You'll start at $42,000 a year, and you'll learn this business from the ground up. No special treatment, no family privileges. I don't understand, Nicole stammered. You told me you wanted to fix your father's company. I'm giving you the chance to learn how, but you'll earn it. I looked her directly in the eyes. Can you do that? She glanced at her father, then back at me. Yes, I can. Finally, I turned to Richard and Diane. I found something interesting in your company's archives. I nodded to Rebecca, who placed copies of the loan documents on the coffee table. Apparently, Thompson Realty owes my family trust $2.3 million from an old loan that was never properly closed out. Richard's face went white. That's impossible. My father paid. He restructured it, read the documents. I watched him scan the papers, watched understanding and then horror dawn on his face. I could demand payment right now. I could bankrupt your company before dinner time. Angela, please. Diane's voice was barely a whisper. I'm not going to. I sat down in Robert's chair, suddenly tired. I'm forgiving the debt. All $2.3 million of it. The room erupted in shocked exclamations, but I held up my hand for silence. But Thompson Realty is going to change. Real changes. Real accountability. You'll implement the restructuring plan Rebecca and I have developed. You'll meet quarterly performance benchmarks. And Richard? I looked at him steadily. You'll step down as CEO. You'll become chairman, an advisory role. The company needs fresh leadership, and your ego needs to accept that. Richard looked like I'd slapped him, but slowly he nodded. Why? Jordan's voice was thick with emotion. After everything we've done, why are you helping us? I looked around the room at these people, flawed, manipulative, desperate people who are also my family. Because I've spent the last week trying to figure out what love really means, I said slowly. Not the easy love that writes checks and asks no questions, not the love that enables bad behavior and calls it generosity, but the hard love that sets boundaries and demands growth. I stood and walked to Jordan, placing my hand on his shoulder. I'm not doing this because you deserve it, sweetheart. You don't. None of you do. I felt tears building, but kept my voice steady. I'm doing it because I need to know I raised a man who can learn from his mistakes, because I believe that people can change if they're given a reason to and held accountable when they don't. I don't know if I can do this, Jordan whispered. What if I fail? Then you fail, and you deal with the consequences like an adult. I squeezed his shoulder. But Jordan, I think you're stronger than you believe you are. You just need to stop being afraid of finding out. I addressed the whole room now. This is my final offer. These terms are non-negotiable. Accept them, and we move forward as a family, a real family, built on honesty and respect. Refuse them, and you're on your own. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. I accept, Jordan said first. Me too, Nicole added quietly. Richard looked at his wife, and something passed between them. Years of marriage, of shared history, of facing hard truths together. We accept, he said. Christmas came to Chicago with snow and cold, and the kind of crisp beauty that makes you forget about the harsh months ahead. I was hosting a small dinner, just Jordan, Nicole, Rebecca, and David Patterson, who'd become more friend than attorney over the past months. The Thompson family had their own celebration across town. We weren't estranged, but we'd established boundaries. Sunday dinners once a month. Business meetings kept professional. Space for everyone to breathe and grow. "Mom, you need to see this." Jordan came into the kitchen where I was basting the turkey, his phone in hand. My bank account. I wiped my hands and looked at the screen. 3 deposits marked loan repayment, A. Ridgway, $1,500 total. "You're ahead of schedule," I said, surprised. I picked up weekend work doing bookkeeping for small businesses. It's not glamorous, but he shrugged, and there was something different in his shoulders, something that looked like pride. "It feels good to earn things, you know?" I hugged him, and for the first time in months, it didn't feel complicated. Nicole came in carrying a pie. "Mrs. Ridgway, Angela, I wanted to thank you again for the opportunity. I got my first promotion last week, assistant property manager. Rebecca told me. She says you're a natural. I actually love it. Who knew I'd enjoy negotiating with contractors and solving tenant complaints?" She smiled, genuine and warm. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see you clearly." After dinner, while Jordan and Nicole did dishes and David and Rebecca argued about politics in the living room, I found myself in Robert's study. His photograph still sat on the desk, that familiar smile watching over everything. "We did it," I whispered. "It's messy, it's imperfect, but I think we're going to be okay." My phone buzzed. A text from Jordan. "Thank you for not giving up on me. I know I don't say it enough, but I love you. Not for what you do for me, for who you are." I read it 3 times, then walked to the window overlooking my snow-covered garden. 29 years of motherhood had taught me many things, but the past 6 months had taught me something more important. That love without boundaries wasn't love at all. It was just fear in a prettier package. "Angela?" Rebecca appeared in the doorway. "You okay?" "Yeah," I smiled and meant it. "I really am." We returned to the living room where my small, imperfect family had gathered. Jordan was telling David about his new clients, animated in a way I hadn't seen in years. Nicole was looking at him with genuine affection, the kind that comes from weathering storms together. They weren't perfect. Neither was I. But we were honest now, and that counted for something. As I settled into my chair, surrounded by the people I'd chosen to love and who'd chosen to earn that love in return, I thought about the woman I'd been at that wedding reception 6 months ago. The woman who'd been called difficult and dismissed as nobody. She'd been so worried about being loved that she'd forgotten to require respect. But that woman was gone now, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more at peace. "Mom?" Jordan looked over at me. "You've got that look on your face, the one you get when you're thinking deep thoughts." "Just remembering something your father used to say." I smiled at him, at all of them. "That sunrise is God's way of giving you permission to start over." "And?" Nicole asked. "And I'm grateful for every new beginning, even the painful ones." I raised my wine glass, especially the painful ones. We toasted, to new beginnings, to hard-won wisdom, to the messy, complicated, beautiful work of becoming the people we were meant to be. Outside, snow continued to fall on Chicago, blanketing everything in white. And inside, in the house where I'd learned to be both mother and woman, vulnerable and strong, giving and self-respecting, we sat together in the warm glow of imperfect love. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined at that wedding reception, but it was real, and it was earned, and it was ours. And for the first time in 29 years, that was enough. 1 year later, Angela received a text from Jordan. "Mom, I made my last payment today, all $65,000 repaid, but I want to keep making those payments into a savings account this time. Turns out I like the discipline. Turns out I like the man it's making me become. Thank you for loving me enough to let me struggle. Thank you for teaching me that some gifts only have value when they're earned. I visit Dad's grave every month now. Tell him about the man I'm trying to be. I think he'd be proud. I know I'm finally proud of myself. Love you, not for what you give me, for who you are." Angela read the message twice, then walked to Robert's photograph. "He gets it now," she whispered. "Our boy finally gets it." And in the reflection of the glass frame, she saw herself smiling, not with the careful control of a woman afraid of being taken advantage of, but with the genuine joy of someone who'd learned that the best love stories aren't about sacrifice. They're about teaching the people you love to become their best selves, even when it breaks your heart to do it.